Hi, I'm Melinda Iverson, and welcome to this episode of Wisdom Keepers of Earth. Today, my guest is Tim Walter. He's a UK-based house healer and alternative life coach. This conversation was exceptional. We talked about ghosts in the house and how you can actually work with them, maybe help them on their way, the earth energies in your home. We did talk about Hamish Miller and his work with Hamish Miller, the wonderful UK Scottish dowser. And I look forward to seeing your comments about this wonderful interview that Tim granted us today. Thank you so much, and I'll let him explain in his own words. Enjoy.
Yeah, well, 7:30 in the morning. I think you're doing really well.
Ah,
I I couldn't do a 7:30 in the morning interview, I have to say.
well, I love you and I love your work, Tim.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me on Wisdom Keepers of Earth. I've admired your videos. I love your how-to dowsing videos. I love your work with Hamish Miller, and I love your housework as well. And so, for the audience that don't really know who you are, I'm just going to ask you to give me your quick, how you got into what you're doing right now. Because I know you were in film and now you're doing house healing and coaching.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and I think we should probably also thank my mentor, Hamish Miller, for bringing us together, shall we say, even from where he is at the moment. Bless him. Um, Well, yeah, a brief introduction. Let's see. Basically, nothing has been planned. So I was a filmmaker, I was a video producer, writer, that sort of thing, mostly in the non-broadcast area of business. So I was involved in helping companies communicate and do their training and sales promotion, all that stuff, and help them run conferences and this sort of thing. And very, very I want to use the word mundane and boring, but it was a way to earn a living, and I did enjoy it. I went to film school to learn about making movies, and I ended up in the corporate arena, which kind of says quite a lot about the state of me at the time. However, so I did that for 30 plus years really, but in 1998. The key thing happened in my life, which was that my family and I moved house. We moved from the congested southeast of England across to a much more rural environment on the Welsh borders here in the UK. And it was significant because although it's a really normal everyday process, moving house, we moved into a house where spirit decided to make contact with us. So we discovered that we were sharing the house with the spirit of a deceased lady. And that fundamentally completely changed absolutely everything. And that one decision to move into that house is really how my entire life changed completely, utterly, and 100%. And that we'll talk about the journey and about the importance of Hamish Miller to the whole connection with the earth and the importance of what we perceive the earth to be. We'll get on to all of that stuff in a minute, but fundamentally what I realized was that in opening up to spirit and accepting that there was this other aspect of life, it made such a profound difference to me, to how I felt, that I just started to want to share it with other people. And that is really what began the journey. And that actually is what led me to meet Hamish Miller.
So backing up just a second, if someone who isn't, well, those that are watching this interview are going to understand this, but hey, if I moved into a house and there was a spirit there, I have options. One is run, move. The second one is call in some help, or three, am I crazy?
Yeah,
Is this really happening? How do I verify this? And
yeah,
do I want to follow this trail? Because you had to make a decision at one point that this wasn't going to scare you and
yeah,
we're just going to open up to the
Yeah.
possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what happened was that basically there were lots of little tiny things that were happening around the house. This is how we started to kind of become aware that things were not quite what we thought they were. And now, so we talk about things like flashing lights and lights going off and TVs being turned on and off and all this sort of stuff and things going missing, which is always an absolutely key signal that something's not quite right. I mean, literally, as I was using some tools, I think it was a chisel or a hammer, I can never quite remember now, but I remember distinctly working in a part of the house that was particularly odd, should we say. And I was working there just to sort of try to do some cosmetic work to it and put down a hammer. Let's say it was the hammer, it might be a chisel. Um, I put it down, turned round, and then went back to pick up the hammer, and it wasn't there. It just literally vanished in that split second, right? So that sort of thing is the sort of thing that you go, what, what? Something that was there. Where is it? You know, you look around and all of that, and it reappeared 24 hours later or so, right in the middle of the floor in that room. So it was given back, but when these things disappear, it's like, okay, there's something odd going on here. But that sort of thing isn't like genuinely, it isn't scary because it's like you think, oh, I'm obviously just losing my concentration. Something's not quite right. But I was also personally, you know, my wife was experiencing some of these things as well. You know, she was witness to them. But for me, what was happening was that I was starting to see like black shadows out the corner of my eye. So people, as it were, moving in peripheral vision in the house, going around the house. And and so I did think that I was possibly, you know, losing the plot, losing touch with reality. No, seriously. And we did in the end. Well, not in the end. I mean, after a fairly short period of time, we had some builders in to give us a quote on some work, and it was one of these builders that, that this fella he just said, look, it's a lovely house, but I would recommend you get it spiritually cleared. Now, this is coming from a builder, and it's like, you know, I mean, call me prejudiced and, you know, and sort of judgmental, but I is the last sort of person that you would expect to be spiritually aware. But you know, obviously, as we know now, I mean, everybody is, and there are some really unlikely people that are incredibly connected to spirit. So anyway, this guy recommended that we get some people in to spiritually clear the house, which we did. We had three ladies turn up fairly soon after that conversation with the builder. Three ladies turned up like the three witches out of Macbeth. They came into the house, and they, you know, after chit chat, sort of introductions, they actually used dowsing rods, and that was pretty much the first time I'd seen dowsing rods. And they were following the dowsing rods, and they went out to this back part of the house, which was the room that I'd said was a bit odd. And that's where they said, oh, you've got dragon lines here, and you've also got I can't remember whether they called her a guardian at that point, but certainly they said there's somebody here and she just wants to be part of the family. So they explained that she had been doing these things to gently make contact with us in a way that wasn't going to terrify us. So that's what she'd been doing. So these things that we'd been experiencing were basically her, and it was a spirit of a lady called Jane. And we lived with Jane and had many conversations with Jane using dowsing. For we lived in that house for 15 years.
Wow, that's quite a story. So I love the fact that she wasn't trying to terrify you. She was trying to gently make communication. That's really important. And the first time you'd seen dowsing rods, and then you decided to pursue this idea of dowsing.
Yeah, because basically, when Jane was introduced to us by these ladies, as my wife and me were there, and we were watching the three of them. They, as I say, the three of them had dowsing rods. In fact, there was a young lad with them as well. He was kind of just tagging along for the curiosity value, I think, you know. But so there was quite a little group of us in that room, and um, the Mary, her name was. I just realised Mary is the name of the mother of Jesus, of course, but so it's quite an interesting name to have present. But Mary was the sort of lead lady that was doing most of the talking. She was the one talking with Jane most of the time. And the thing was that although this was quite a bizarre experience for my wife and I, because we hadn't been associated with this sort of thing at all up to that point, really. Um, it actually also seemed incredibly normal. It seemed like, yeah, of course this is what's happening. You know, of course there's a spirit of a dead person here. Of course, what else would it be? You know, and it's like, and the fact that she'd done all these things, and it was very clear from what Mary was saying, is that no, she wants to be part of the family. She's been very, very careful. She didn't want to scare you, blah de blah de blah, right? So if I wanted to, what was the outcome of that conversation was that I wanted to be able to communicate with Jane, because I thought, well, this is fantastic. I've got this great opportunity to speak to a friendly ghost. She must know loads of stuff that I don't know. That I want to talk to her. So that's what I thought. I'd have to learn to use dowsing rods in order to do what Mary was doing and speak to this personality, this person, which was what I did. I mean, so I thought actually that I thought that's what dowsing was. I didn't even know that dowsing could be used to find things like water, underground water. I thought it was literally talking to spirits. That's what I thought dowsing was, and so yeah. Anyway,
Right.
that's probably
So
enough for the moment.
that's a beautiful story. My question is, so what would Mary help you with, like plumbing or things going pedestrian ideas with the house, or did she bring in, what kind of
What would
questions would you ask Mary?
Jane is
I'm
Jane
sorry,
was the
Jane.
spirit. Yes, all
The
right.
spirit of
So
Jane.
yeah,
What kind
yeah,
of
that's
questions
right.
would you ask the spirit?
Well, I mean, to me, it was for a start. We wanted to find out who she was. Was she associated with the house? Did she, what was her involvement? Why was she there? So these sort of questions, we got through pretty quickly. I do remember there was so some of the answers to those questions are pretty basic and mundane. I mean, she did live in another part of the village when she was a girl, and she went to the house when she was a young girl with her mother, who used to do some cleaning in that house. The house that we bought used to belong to a kind of industrialist. He was a confectioner. So the area where we lived was a place called the Forest of Dean, and that is a little way out. It's about 20-25 miles from Bristol. So Bristol was in the sort of early Victorian times, all around that period, I mean, and earlier, was quite a centre for trade, international trade. And this guy, John Ludlow, had basically retired from being a confectioner, working with sugar and producing confections. And he'd retired to this village that we lived in and had this house built, bit of infill in a Victorian terrace. And so Jane's mum used to clean for John Ludlow, and she would go down with her sometimes. So there was a connection there. But you think, well, okay, this is all very normal. It's an interesting story, as it were. It's an interesting picture. But Jane said, because we were getting the hang of using the dowsing rods by this time, fairly soon after that initial conversation, that there was some evidence that she had been there. And so we asked where that was, and we followed the dowsing rods, and they crossed at a window frame. And this Jane was adamant that there was something within the window frame, within the window sill, which was basically just plaster, just full of plaster, that would prove to us that Jane had been there as a little girl. And so I said to Nikki, my wife, okay, right, well, we're going to dig into this windowsill and find whatever it is in here. And I was expecting it would be something like, something really nice, like a little gold ring or something like that. But actually, what we found was a little hazelnut, and a little in its little case. I haven't got it. I used to have it on my desk here actually, not so long ago. Um, and the reason that you know that's not particularly an odd thing, but it is odd that you don't find plasterers mixing their plaster with bits of tree in them. So that's one thing. So it wouldn't have been like a sensible thing to have in plaster, but it would have been a sensible thing for a little girl to be just fiddling with in Victorian times or whatever, with when there are no other, toys around. So it's just playing. So this thing was that's what we unearthed and found. So
That's so sweet.
there, yeah, there were all sorts of questions like that, very basic ones. But obviously, what happened was that I was talking to, my parents, and they happened to mention to, well, my dad happened to mention to his sister, who he knew was interested in earth energy. He happened to mention, oh, Tim is doing this at his house and he's doing dowsing. And my aunt bought me a copy of a book, which was The Sun and the Serpent by Hamish Miller. And that book was like, oh, this is amazing. Reading that was what made me realize, oh, dragon lines is what, the dowsers had identified as being in our house. Hamish Miller was referring sometimes to earth energy lines in his book, The Sun and the Serpent, as dragon lines, as dragon energy. And there was a whole row of things that started to go, oh, this is fascinating, right? I want to know more. I want to get a nice set of dowsing rods made by Hamish, which is what he was. He was a blacksmith. So I started corresponding with Hamish, and that was what led us into our friendship and working relationship
Oh,
from that point.
Jane really brought you along. But you were open
She,
to hearing what she had to say, and you were open to the
yeah,
learning Dallas
yeah,
forward.
yeah. And I'm aware that I didn't really answer your question, which was what else were you talking to her about? And of course, what we were saying was, well, basically, what's it like to be dead? What's it like to be on your side of things? You know, one of the things that was really interesting, given that we are talking about the earth and our relationship to the earth, one of the first things that she said to us was about the earth energy lines. Because what we had was two earth energy lines that actually came together. They crossed, and then they kind of went parallel across the center of the house and left the other half of the house. But what she said was, think of it like a row of people queuing up at a bus stop, right? The earth energy line itself was like a row of people. And it was like such a strong image that it stayed with me right from that point. And what she was alluding to was consciousness. And this is so exciting and so fascinating, because once you start to delve into, well, what is earth energy in terms of what does it, how do we relate to it, and what's it saying about the earth, and what's it saying about us as human beings or spiritual beings in the human form? What is this saying about our reality and our potential reality? Well, as soon as you start to look into all of that, the lens that I wanted to explore it through was the lens of science. So I started to look into quantum science, and I picked up the work of Dr. Amit Goswami, and was following his sort of theories about the nature of consciousness through quantum physics. And it makes complete sense that there is that these lines are not only in electrical fields, which we'll talk about in a minute, but they are also aspects of consciousness in potential, which are more concentrated lines of consciousness. Now, I'm using this word consciousness a lot, but it's a kind of a catch-all phrase for the stuff that we are made of and are part of in terms of realizing a an outer and an inner form. So the idea that Jane had that was to say, well, think of these lines like a row of people standing at a bus stop is brilliant, because we are, sorry about my squeaky chair, it's brilliant because we are like the idealized form for interacting with physical material. Obviously, we're also programmed to look for the anthropological rendition of form in anything. So when we look into the quantum field of creation, which is that quantum field, when we look into that field, we're looking into a field of potential, we're looking into a field of possibility, and we're looking into a field of consciousness. And the easiest thing that we can recognize within that field of potential and possibility is actually a human form. It's a personality. That's what we're programmed to pick up on. And so to talk about that energy line as though it were a queue of people was brilliant, because that is relevant and so simple, and it also connects our human form to that space as well.
Yes, and not only that, but if you think of it that way, these lines are continuous. So if they wrap around the globe, then it's a queue of individuals as one wrapping around the globe.
Yeah,
that in
exactly.
itself is brilliant, right? I love that. Wow.
Yeah.
So, you know what? I found that what you were saying to me is that dowsing and Jane were a way for you to begin to become more aware. It was and Hamish.
100%.
Were stepping stones to you.
100%.
And your consciousness and opening up to the infinite possibilities of who we are, what we're doing, where we're coming from, what our potential is.
Yeah. And the thing is, I tend to go very deep into it and say these statements that sound very deep and significant and heavy. But the thing about it is that actually the essence, and this is the essence of house healing as well, the essence of it is that the reality that we experience on Mother Earth, let's say, that's connected to Mother Earth, to Gaia, is the experience of our existence in our lives is absolutely governed by, as you know, by our inner state of being. Now, when we, the Heart Math Institute has done so much work, and there are so many brilliant people out there, like Dr. Joe Dispenza, for example. We could name a whole list of people that are doing fantastic work about understanding and associating the energy fields of the heart with physical health, with well-being. Now, what they don't really talk about is necessarily, although I think Greg Braden does a bit, is about the way that if we mindfully associate with the heart and emanate and enter a situation with an open heart, with that energy of love and compassion, then the external environment, the actual external events take a different form to what they would have done if you're coming at them from the lower chakras, from the base chakra, from the sacral, from the solar plexus even. Because this experience of reality is internally driven. Everything is internal, and this external environment is the illusion. It's real, but it's illusory. Now, what I'm getting at is the simple act of dowsing, the simple act of picking up a bit of wire and bending it, and asking whatever your heart leads you to ask out there, because that's what you're doing. You're kind of asking the universe out there, although obviously we've also got an internal element to that universe. But really, we're sort of asking out there. That leads you, or can you lead you very, very simply on a very gentle path that can utterly and completely change your life, completely change your reality, if you choose to follow the the breadcrumbs, as it were, along the way, follow the steps along the way. So what I'm saying is that the simplicity of the process is actually beautiful, and it can go as deep as you want it to go. And I tend to jump off the deep end and when we're doing interviews like this, I get overexcited because it really does. It really does reflect the nature and the potential of the human being in the form that especially what we're living through right now.
Yes, but it takes choice. And there are, you know, people who are dowsers who have come to a certain level of competency, let's say, and understanding, but for some reason they don't often feel like they need to go higher than that. So there's something internal to you that says, I'm a seeker. I'm going to continue to look for something more that's available.
I think I'm driven by wanting to. That's an interesting question, actually, Melinda, because I haven't gone into this space before. I think I'm driven by wanting to be better than I am. I want to improve. So, and I don't mean that from an ego point of view. I think that my attitude to myself, like many of us, is quite hard on myself. I am quite hard on myself. I certainly was, and I found that consequently, I found the world a very difficult place. As we said earlier on, we create the world. We know that we create the world, but we absolutely create the world from what is going on in a universe. If we are riddled with turmoil and completely detached from who the heck are we, then the world that you experience as a human being on a very physical level, three-dimensional level, is going to be quite a tough world. But it needn't be that. So once I realized that, this is a self-development process, then I am always going to be a work in progress. I always want to improve, not because it makes me great, but because it changes the world in which I live.
Yes.
It's as simple as that.
Yes. Yes. Open-hearted, seeking, aware, those things all come to me. And it's interesting how you have developed this into a coaching practice as well. So all of a sudden now you've gotten to a level where you feel like you can offer an assistance to others who are seeking that open-heartedness and positive way of looking at the world, or at least be in balance with whatever is coming towards them. So you moved up their notch, well, so to speak.
Yeah, but it wasn't planned, right? So this is what I said right at the start when I gave you the one word answer to how did you get here, and I said life. Right in the early days when once I'd started to work with Hamish Miller, as I say, I saw the benefit of where dowsing could take people. So I started doing little workshops. I would run them from home, get a couple of people at a time, and they would be based on learning to douse, and then I would take people into the space of connecting to earth energy, to earth, because I always felt that was the most important thing for them to do. So all the while I was still working as a video producer and a writer and a director and earning a substantial a reasonable income, reasonable, whatever, depends how you look at it. I was earning some money doing that job, and the more I learned about the spiritual world, the more that was fascinating, the less I was interested in making corporate video programs about training for life assurance or for other aspects of financial services or whatever it may be. Now, so what happened was that I started to try to change the clients that I was working for, and I was lucky enough to find that Ecotricity, which is the UK's fourth largest electrical energy company over here in the UK. Ecotricity is a green energy company. It's run by a guy called Dale Vince. And it was in Stroud, so it's just a few miles from where I was living. So I approached them and said, "Look, come on, this is I'm doing videos. This is what I do. Can I do some work with you? Because I really like what you're doing." So I started these conversations with Dale Vince, and was lucky enough to spend a few years working with him, working closely with him as much as anybody can work closely with him. He's a great character. Um, uh, to make video programs for them, and that was really interesting and lovely, because it was far more kind of environmentally concerned, and that was what really was getting my heart going. But I always felt that, you know, the spiritual stuff was far more important than the video making stuff. And what happened was that I was losing interest even in working with people like Dale Vince. And so when Hamish passed away in 2010, I basically said to Nikki, my wife, you know, look, I either do this now or I stop. You know, I wanted to make a transition across to doing more work in the spiritual arena. So I still had to earn some money. And we were at this point in 2010, and a couple of years thereafter, because I'm dreadful at making decisions. So this process, I say it kind of glibly, like, well, we made this decision, this is what I really must do, this is what I said. But actually, it was like many a conversation, you know, well into the night, you know, sitting up with maybe a glass of beer or whatever, trying to make this decision about what do I do this, do I not do this, do I do this, do I not do this? And, you know, yes, that was the way I was going to go. At the same time, my wife was leaving. Well, basically her job was kind of changing, and she felt that she could move on to somewhere else. We actually needed to sell the house to cover quite a lot of debts that I'd run up. Primarily, I'd run these debts up because, as I say, I was losing interest in the corporate world. So actually, I was doing less and less work, and I was spending more and more time dowsing and doing the really magical stuff that I wanted to find out about, but I wasn't earning money. So we ended up in this financial mess, which I'm definitely not proud of, but it meant, well, okay, we're going to have to sell the house. Nikki was quite willing to change jobs. I could be based anywhere. So we basically said to the universe, right, where do you want us? And what happened straight away was that all of the jobs that Nikki could apply for in her area of expertise were coming up in a city called Leeds, which is up here in the north of England. And so it was like, oh, okay, obviously we're going to be going north. So she applied for a job, she got a job. We came up here to look for somewhere to live because our house was on the market during this time, and there's a whole load of stories about trying to sell that house. But fundamentally, we moved up. We rented a place in 2013. So we've been here for 10 years now, up in the north, up in the Yorkshire Dales. But that was an exercise in faith and trust, in knowing that the universe would put us somewhere that we wanted to be. But it wasn't an easy process, because we ended up moving about 6 times in 2 years. So 6 different places in 2 years. So it was really a time of big change. But there was always a clarity of message from upstairs, from the management. By this time, I'd got quite a good relationship with an individual spirit guide that was, you know, I would talk to, and he would talk through me actually every now and again. Well, quite a lot actually. So he was constantly saying, you know, it's okay, don't worry about it. You're on the right path. Just keep doing what you're doing. Yeah, in the end, my father had died in a couple of years after Hamish had died, and there was a period where my mother was on her way out, effectively, and really, Spirit had said, my guide had said, that our next house, the proper one that we would stay in, would be connected to Mum's passing, which is exactly what happened. We bought this house as a result of Mum's passing in 2017. So bless her, you know, in a way, it's his Mum's house. But it's just beautiful the way that if you are able to relax into allowing the universe to work and function as part of you and you as part of it, how rather wonderfully everything kind of falls together and sits together. Did you get any of that?
I got all of it, and my
Oh,
phone
good.
message was happening, so I was turning off the volume. It didn't ring, but and it the phone started ringing exactly when you started talking about Hamish. So
Bless him.
yeah, he's with us moving 6 times in that short period of time.
Yeah.
So for someone who, first of all, I want to know, did you say goodbye to Jane when you
Yeah.
left your other house?
Yeah, we did. We actually made a point of going, and because the room out the back basically became Jane's room. That's what we referred to it as. That's where she used to hang out most of the time. She would come around, be anywhere in the house, but that was Jane's room. So Nikki and I, at the end there, we made a point of going into Jane's room and saying goodbye. And we were both a bit choked up. It was quite an emotional, me and Nikki, not me and Jane. So Nikki and I were both fairly emotional about it. But I remember seeing Jane's presence was there. I could see, in my inner vision, as it were, I could see her broadly speaking, standing there. And I kind of talked to her with the dowsing because that's the way I communicated with her, and I was saying, I've got to go, and thank you so much for everything you've done, and I was in mid sentence, and then she was like, yeah, bye, and then she just disappeared into the distance, and it was like, what is that? It's like absolutely, emotionless, no emotion, and there was Nick, my wife and I was like, well, is that it? Really? 15 years and then she's gone. So what was interesting, it was a bit, it hurt a bit. I have to say, it did hurt a bit. But since we experienced that, we know now that when we're interacting with spirits like that, with the spirits that are deceased, then very often they don't come with that emotional energy that we expect to get from people. It's just not there because they're not in this physical realm. They're not experiencing these emotions like this.
Yes.
They can feel quite, you can find spirits that are trapped, that are quite, that you're feeling that trapped energy and blah blah blah. But quite often when they say goodbye, they're just like, yep, okay, bye, zoom, and off they go. So, but the thing was that once we moved up north, we moved to the first place that we rented, and I was sitting in meditation one day, and this was probably about 2 or 3 months after we'd left the other house, and in that meditation, I felt a familiar energy, and I thought, Jane, is that you? It's like, yeah, and I said, what are you doing here? She said, well, don't you want me around? And it was like, yeah, sure, yeah, great, lovely. But I thought you were stuck with that other hat. No, okay. so so there was a part of that story that I've missed. Go on.
Jane's been with you. She's been following you
Yeah,
through
yeah,
every move,
yeah.
I guess.
So she's basically now she's still here as part when I'm doing the healing work and when I'm working on people's houses. She actually is part of the healing team, and her role at the other house was as a guardian of the energy of that space. And so what I ask her to do on a fairly regular basis is to actually go to the house that I'm working on and to hold the space so that it doesn't get too chaotic for the people that are living in the house that we're working on. Because quite often this house healing actually is done over a period of several weeks in different sessions. And what can happen is that if you've got spiritual activity within a house, once you start to open it up a bit more and start to move on and whatever you're dealing with, then it can get a bit bumpy for the residents. So Jane goes in and looks after it on that level, on that subtle energy level, and she's brilliant at that. And it's brilliant when I've got sensitive clients who say, "Oh, Jane was around last night. It's brilliant. It's really nice to have her here, and I know she's doing a great job." And it's lovely. It's great. So it's all part of that consciousness, the unity consciousness, and Jane's a part of that unity consciousness in a different vibration, able to influence an aspect of that experience in what we term a different place,
So
somewhere
I
else.
have an experience and a question for you. I woke up in my family's condo and I was pounding on the closet door. Let me out! Let me out! I channel, and this
Huh?
being apparently was trapped in their house, and I would wake up literally 3 nights in a row pounding on the closet doors, let me out, let me
Right,
out. And I thought, what the heck? I'd never experienced anything like that before. And sure enough, there was a little being
right.
gotten trapped from another dimension, and I could see it under the bed every now and then. It was hiding and it was afraid. That was a real wake up call for me, a little introduction into how things can come and go dimensionally and sometimes get trapped
Yeah,
and not
yeah, yeah.
needing to,
And
but
also, it's oh,
the
absolutely,
door got
yeah,
closed.
absolutely. I mean, you know, yeah. I mean, there are several aspects to that because you were experiencing it through your awareness, and that says something about the nature of the human being. That says something. I know, if you're sensitive and you're a channel, then that's the sort of thing that's going to happen. It's like, but everybody has this ability and the capacity for hosting many different forms of energy. It's just that the one that tends to stick with us the best and the most is what we call me. That's the energy that sits within us. But we are fundamentally playing host to all sorts of different energies all the time. I mean, let's not go into the fact that we're actually made of absolutely nothing. But the thing is that we are hosts to our emotions, and so when we get taken by an energy like anger, um, we're really just playing host to the energy of anger for that little period of time, and then it'll move on and go, and then we're okay. Well, they call it a blind rage, don't they? If you're not yourself. But equally, you can play host to the energy of love or any of the more positive aspects. But you're simply a space in the consciousness in this field that is playing host to an experience. And our thinking, because we are so well designed to interact with the three dimensions, our thinking is stuck and lodged in the three-dimensional thinking. When we can detach from that and be far more aware of our universal nature, our cosmic nature, if you like, which actually is to be everywhere and every place at the same time. I mean, actually, ironically, that kind of refers to that movie, but let's not necessarily go down that one. But the point is that the quantum realm is, there is no here and there. There is no separation. It's all about everything being connected and everything existing in juxtaposed and interrelational aspects. And there's even, developing and emerging aspects of quantum mechanics, which are all about relational quantum mechanics. It's all about how aspects within that 0 point field sit with each other aspect at a certain point in what we refer to as time. But of course, in the quantum realm, time doesn't exist.
Yes.
So
Yes.
there are very clear parallels between, the spiritual concepts that we all understand and a lot of your viewers would understand and live by, and the quantum mechanics and quantum theory of varying different levels. And that's what, to me, is really exciting, is the way that science is absolutely coming around and meeting the spirituality, the spiritual concepts, and the spiritual way of seeing things. I mean, yeah,
Well,
I do go on, don't
the
I?
time that I have experienced this quantum, I'm going to call it a reality shift, is when I lost an earring in one city and it showed up in my apartment 3 days later. It just dropped in on
Brilliant.
the carpet with a thud.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So it's,
that is brilliant.
yes, these things are possible.
Yeah,
So to
yeah,
know the difference,
yeah. No,
you know,
yeah,
there is the infinite possibility of changing your reality by being able to perhaps go into an elevator, if you will, up or down or sideways or however, to come out into a reality where perhaps your imaginal realm is creating something more balanced for yourself. And so that's the place that I look to it. When I started dowsing, I had no idea you could find water. I was all about health.
yeah. Right, exactly.
For me,
Yeah,
the dowsing, dowsing the physical, the mental, the emotional, the spirit levels was all about working those I'm going to call them levels, but you know what I mean, those kind of
yeah, yeah,
spaces where you can delineate if you're holding emotion or if you're having a misunderstanding with the mental concepts. um, and this also is a stepping stone, I think, to helping others come into balance with themselves. They begin to understand if that emotion is theirs, if they're holding it for someone else, right? And how they can release
yeah,
it without it causing any more disturbance in the force. you know?
yeah, 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 yeah. I'm quite
So
quite
having
comfortable
anger is
using those
one thing,
terms, but yeah,
right? Having anger is one thing, directing it is something else. And so not directing the anger, understanding that it's there and it exists. I want
yeah.
to know how Hamish, when you worked with Hamish, he seemed to be a very down to earth sort of, I'm going to use the word enlightened being, but he was very relaxed in himself.
He was great.
He
Yeah,
just seemed to be very comfortable in his own skin and, in his body. And these earth energy lines must have affected him in some way where he was able to also expand his ideas and his consciousness according to
hey,
your
Hamish.
experience.
Yeah, I mean, what you say about him is absolutely true, and it comes across on the videos, on the YouTube channel. I think there are three 1 hour videos or so where Hamish is dowsing and interacting with Earth energy and explaining it in at that time, and what you see is what you get, and he was like that on and off camera, and I've never met anybody that was so open-hearted. And I've also never met anybody that laughed so much. I mean, Hamish was almost constantly laughing, and he would quite often sort of tell me not to take myself too seriously. So it's all very well, Tim, but let's not take ourselves too seriously. And but he was very aware of the gravitas of what he was trying to share with people, and he did used to get quite frustrated by not being able to reach enough people. Um, he was very relaxed in himself up to us up to a point. What he hated was actually doing public speaking. He hated it, and he hated taking big workshops because he just felt that pressure. Bless him. But in terms of communicating and in terms of being connected to the management, he always felt that he had left part of himself upstairs when he had his near-death experience.
Yes.
So that was for him. That was his big life-changing, major occurrence was his near-death experience, and he would he was a Taurian, and he'd always say, well, it took something like that to get me to shift across to actually, because I'm so thick-skinned, he'd say that I needed something as dramatic as that to make an impact. But of course, he wasn't really thick-skinned, and he certainly wasn't closed-hearted. He was very open-hearted. He was a lovely, lovely guy.
And
Yeah,
you learned from
but
him.
he was very
Sorry, go ahead.
well. What I was going to say was that he was very, very grounded. This
Mm,
is the thing. This is the key thing. There are some people that bless them, that that actually would really benefit from being more grounded. They can be incredibly air orientated and very spiritually connected, but they can't ground it in order to be more effective in their work and in their own peace. Now, a lot of that is about understanding themselves, and it's really important to understand yourself when you're doing any of this work, and to continually do the healing work on yourself, so that you're going through this process of keeping, well, trying to make the channels as clear as possible. And really, Hamish was doing that all his life, but he was driven by the desire to help the population and his desire to help the earth. And what he was convinced about was that when you douse and communicate with the earth, because this is something we haven't touched on, but maybe we've got time to do so, you can get a response from the earth. And he was convinced that it was the earth trying to tell him something, trying to illustrate how there was a two-way communication that could take place between the earth and humanity. And now, of course, that is occurring through consciousness. And the earth is as much made of consciousness as we are, a consciousness being that part of the quantum realm that exhibits itself in the nature of asking the question, what am I? You know, it's as simple as that.
So, not taking ourselves too seriously here. Um, so what do you think were your biggest takeaways from Hamish after working with him for some 20 years? Yes.
Well, no, it wasn't 20 years. It was actually only 7.
Oh, I don't know where
It
I
was
got
actually, yeah, it was actually,
my.
no, it was actually only, yeah, from 19, yeah, whatever it was. It was the last 7 years of his life.
Mm.
Um, I, what did I do? Well, one thing that I took away was actually a complete surprise when he did pass away. There were, on the day that he passed away, the day after, he passed away in the night. He passed away in the night of the 25th of January 2010, which, as any of your Scottish viewers will know, is Burns Night. So he'd had a lovely meal celebrating Burns Night, which is very important to the Scots. And then he had heart failure. His heart ceased to work. I'm not laughing. I am laughing. Bless him. I'm laughing because he knew damn well that that's what was going to happen, and he'd put everything in place so that his widow Bar was looked after, and he'd made some arrangements and all sorts of things, and he was a very organised guy. And he'd actually said some months prior to passing away, he knew it was happening, and he said, actually, I'm quite looking forward to it. I'm quite looking forward to going back. So what's the biggest takeaway? The biggest takeaway, so he died, he passed away in the evening. That was announced during the day, the following day, and 40,000 people hit the website, and it just crashed. Because it just couldn't take that amount of traffic. And I'd once asked him, how many people do you think you've affected in your work? And he said, oh, a couple of thousand, maybe, if I'm lucky. 40,000 on day one went to see. Oh, no. Right? Bless him. That's how much influence he had on the world. And that's important. It's important that in our choices, we understand the choices that we make for ourselves, our individual selves, but our individual choices affect the collective as well.
Well, and through you, he still.
That also has a bearing on the collective consciousness.
Yes. And sorry to step
Yeah,
on.
yeah. I'm not quite sure what you dropped. No, you dropped out. Say it again. I didn't catch what you said.
So through you, he's still influencing people. Absolutely, he's still.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
I watched
Yeah,
that.
his message is.
Yeah, if you haven't seen a YouTube video of Hamish talking about dowsing, please go to Tim Walter's YouTube channel and experience Hamish. He was just lovely. That was one of the very first dowsing books I got, by the way, was the little teeny dowsing book.
The wee book of
The
dowsing.
wee
The
book of
wee book of
dowsing.
dowsing.
Yes.
It's a lovely thing. Yeah, it is. It's brilliant.
Thank you. I want to mention your book.
Yeah, so people could find out if people are interested in exploring some of this some more. I co-wrote a book with my good friend and colleague Adrian Ingleton Weber. It's a book called Spirit and Earth: Handbook to Holistic Living. And really, what we were trying to do in that was to show how simple some of the simple steps are to connect to what we've been talking about today. So Spirit and Earth can be picked up from Amazon or any of the good high street retailers.
Wonderful. And are
And
you
if
still,
people want to know,
sorry?
sorry, I was just going to say, if people want to know more about what I'm about and doing and with the house healing work and this sort of stuff, connect to me on my YouTube channel. That's the best place to start. And if they're interested in the house healing training, then just drop me a line at my website. Ninthrose.com. Yeah, that's the website. That's the basic website. Yeah. So anybody can contact me through that. That's absolutely fine. So thank you very much for having me. It's been great.
Excellent. Thank you.
Take care.